Thank you very much, Tom, and good morning and greetings from Fort Worth, Texas, which is the birthplace of the shale energy revolution. As General Smith said, it all started in the Barnett Shale. And so I have a lot to work in here to tell you about the Barnett Shale, because I think it's important that you understand how all this started and how it's developed and how it's had an impact all over the United States and all over the world. And it all started just up the road from Fort Worth, Texas. And it is, this is our homecoming, Carolyn and my homecoming back to South Carolina, because we did live here back in the 70s, a long time ago, and our firstborn was born here in Greenville, South Carolina. And so it's great to be back. Let me start by describing my organization, the Barnett Shale Energy Education Council, because it was started for the purpose of energy education, and that's what we're here talking about. So I think it would be instructive for you to understand that. Back when the Barnett Shale was starting to develop, which was, this was actually around the year 2000, 2002, as Hopper said, when the Mitchell Energy and then the combination of Mitchell and Devon Energy started developing the Barnett Shale. That's when things really started taking off. And a lot of the initial wells that were drilled in the Barnett Shale were around Fort Worth and outside of the urban areas, but they were starting to creep into the urban areas, especially in Fort Worth. And so about 2006, the drilling rigs were moving into the city, and I mean literally into the city, setting up drilling rigs in the parking lots of malls and churches and down the street from houses. And I mean, this was intensive urban drilling. And at that time, the mayor of Fort Worth said that his office was getting calls from people saying, there's a guy knocking on my door that says he's a landman and he wants to lease my mineral rights, and I don't even know what he's talking about. And can you help? Well, the mayor said, you know, we're not set up to take care of these kinds of issues. And so he strongly encouraged the companies that were drilling in Fort Worth, which included Devon, to establish some kind of a public outreach group, somebody that could answer questions, pick up the phone or answer emails, and provide information to the public. And so that's when some of the companies that were operating there in the Barnett Shale established the Barnett Shale Energy Education Council, and our paths crossed at the right time, and I was made the executive director. So I've been doing that now for 8 years, and it's interesting to look back, because at the time we didn't know how long we would need such an institution. You know, was it just going to be a year or two, or what would it be? Well, it's 8 years now, and we've never been busier. So it's been a very successful effort, and variations of this idea of an energy education group have been replicated around the country. They're all a little different, but a lot of these areas have similar types of organizations. So we have a website, bseec.org. It's on the slide up there. And that's been a very successful website. Of course, these days, your website is one of your primary communication tools, and it still is. We have thousands and thousands of visitors every month. And it's also interesting to note that these visitors that we get are, of course, primarily from Texas, and primarily from the United States. But we have, every month when I look at the report, I'm just amazed at how many foreign countries we have coming to our website, dozens of them. And I've noticed China is one that's been building up in terms of the number of visits we're getting on our website just for the Barnett Shale, because there's so much interest in shales. and that's being reflected in those visits. So we have bseec.org. We also are on Twitter, so at BSEEC, and we have, I think, about 4,500, is it? I believe 4,500 Twitter followers now, so that's, of course, another great way to communicate. I want to start by, it's a little washed out, but I think you can see, just I wanted to put the Barnett Shale into the perspective of looking at the entire state of Texas. One thing, I think you look at Texas and you say, wow, it's made out of oil and gas, because all of those blue dots and those red dots are oil and gas wells. And let's see if I can, there we go. Right in here, right over here, get it, here we are. That is the Barnett Shale in north central Texas. And that is the Dallas-Fort Worth area, primarily Fort Worth. There's a little bit in the Dallas area, and I'll hone in on that in just a minute. But the other thing I'll point out is you see in South Texas, that's called the Eagle Ford Shale. And it's huge, as you see. And it has both those red dots, which are oil, and blue dots, which are red dots, which are natural gas, and blue dots, which are oil. In the Barnett Shale up there, you'll see that it's red primarily. It's because we produce there primarily natural gas. And then if you go out into West Texas, you see a lot of blue. That's the Permian Basin, and that's the largest oil field in the United States, and also natural gas. So you can see there is a lot of oil and gas production in the state of Texas. But if I focus in on the Barnett Shale, here you can see it more clearly. There's Dallas right there, and Fort Worth is underneath all of those red dots. So that's why, as I said, Fort Worth, Texas is the birthplace of not only the Barnett Shale, but what that spawned, which is the shale energy revolution. And a couple of things let me point out about the Barnett Shale that I think is interesting. Notice on the northeast corner of the Barnett Shale, it just stops, dead stops. And that's because there are geologic formations that stopped it, formed a wall. It's called the Munster Arch, but it is a wall that stopped the Barnett Shale. And by the way, the Barnett Shale is a layer of shale rock, about 400 feet thick on average, and it's about 8,000 feet below the surface. And but it to the west, as you see, it just kind of plays out. But on the northeast side, it comes to a hard stop. And then also, if you look down the eastern portion, it comes to a hard stop. That's another geologic formation called the Ouachita Uplift that stopped the Barnett Shale in its tracks right there. And in fact, if I point to Dallas over here, you can see that the Barnett Shale stops right before Dallas. And you may not know the Dallas-Fort Worth area very well, but people talk about DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth, as if it's one homogeneous area, and it's really not. It's a very two cities that are very much rivals, and
Don't like it.
and right, there are people in Dallas that claim they've never been to Fort Worth because they don't see why they would need to, and the same for people in Fort Worth who say Dallas. I don't ever go over there. So, but one of my friends at the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce looked at this when I first showed it to him, and he said, "Ha! Dallas doesn't have the Dallas Cowboys, and they don't have the Barnett Shale." And that is true. You know, the Dallas Cowboys are in Arlington. They're not in Dallas. But the Barnett Shale stops before Dallas, so that's an important thing to note. But also that all of those dots, if you add all those up, each one is a well. There are over 20,000 of these wells that have been drilled in the Barnett Shale, and that's over about the last 15 years. So it's tremendous. It's still one of the top 2 or 3 producing fields natural gas fields in the United States. And so it continues to be very productive. If I point out up in the north part here, you see some blue dots, and that is oil. So there's a little bit of oil produced in the Barnett Shale, but not very much. It's primarily natural gas. And one other thing, let me point out, because this issue already came up this morning. If you take that wall that I mentioned there, the Ouachita uplift, and kind of bring it up here where it intersects this Munster arch, that is just a little bit west of Dallas. It's almost in Dallas, at a place called Irving, Texas. You know about Irving, Texas? It's just another city that's in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but it's been in the news a lot in Texas lately because they're having earthquakes in Irving, Texas. And so a lot of people have said, why is that happening? Is that because of oil and gas activity, because of fracking? And one thing I'll point out here is that right there in Irving, Texas, I just mentioned the Dallas Cowboys. The original Dallas Cowboys Stadium was right there in Irving. And when they built the new Jerry World, as we call it, the new Dallas Cowboys Stadium, about 4 years ago, they didn't need the old one, so they imploded it. 3,000 pounds of dynamite, and it came down. And when these earthquakes, and that was about 4 years ago, when these earthquakes started about 6 months ago, the first accusation was, they said, you know, that was caused by Jerry imploding that stadium. And, you know, with all that dynamite and all that weight that fell down, that has caused these earthquakes. Well, since then, the blame has been on oil and gas activity. And I will point out to you, if you notice, when I point to that Irving area, notice what you don't see around Irving in this area. You don't see many oil and gas wells. It just opens up. There's not much drilling there. And the reason is because all of that uplifting and all of that faulting that form those walls that stop the Barnett Shale all come together right there and create major fault lines. And just as Hopper was talking about what goes on in Oklahoma, this fault system here is it is the largest fault in the state of Texas. And a lot of people that even live in the area had no idea that they were living on a major fault. But it has a name, the Balcones Fault and system, and it runs way north and all the way south, all through Texas. And it's one of the 5 or 6 largest fault zones in the United States. So everyone has been quick to blame oil and gas activity, but the fact of the matter is it's a major fault system. And for whatever reason that the faults in Oklahoma may have decided to move around, that seems to be happening in Texas as well. Let's see. And you saw a similar map to this earlier, but it just points out that the Barnett Shale and all the other shales in Texas are just really what's now a small part of the entire shale system in the United States. But let me get back real quick. I think it's instructive to talk about George Mitchell and his role in developing this, because history is very important. And you might think that that some people set out, George Mitchell in this case, to make a big difference and to invent something like hydraulic fracturing, and which really is not what happened. What happened was George Mitchell, an oil man drilling a lot of wells in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in North Texas, his wells were running out. They were playing out, and he had a big contract to sell natural gas up in Chicago, and his wells were not producing enough. And so he told his engineers, we're going to drill into the Barnett Shale, because everyone knew the Barnett Shale was there, but what they knew was when you drilled into it, nothing came out. And George Mitchell said, we're going to drill into the Barnett Shale and we're going to figure out how to get that natural gas to come out. And I've talked to some of the engineers and geologists that worked for him at the time, and they all said, Mr. Mitchell, you're wasting your money. You can't get the gas to come out of the shale. It's too hard. It's too impermeable. And he said, well, we're going to keep trying. And so he tried over 20 years, different kinds of hydraulic fracturing, trying to make it work. And little by little, they made progress and, finally put it all together, and it worked. And natural gas, these wells became economic, producing natural gas wells. And shortly after that, of course, the word started getting around and what old George was doing, and everyone else figured it out, and then, the rest is history. The technology quickly spread, and now we see it all over the United States and all over the world. So a few facts about the Barnett Shale. As I've said, it's the first shale that was drilled, and it was really when Devon combined with George Mitchell and Mitchell Energy combined the hydraulic fracturing and the horizontal drilling that things really began to happen. The Barnett Shale covers 25 counties and 5,000 square miles. Approximately 5 million people live in that area, so you've got 20,000 natural gas wells that now are coexisting in and around millions of people, and that's important. And that the drilling in the Barnett Shale has been now for years one of the largest economic engines in the United States. In Texas and in the United States as well. But it's been an extremely important economic engine in North Texas. And whereas when the rest of the country was kind of going through a recession, we weren't totally recession-proof in North Texas, but close to it. And because of the economic impact that we knew was occurring, my organization back in 2007 first contracted with an economist in Texas, famous economist Ray Perryman of the Perryman Group, to analyze that economic impact and tell us just how important it is. And so Dr. Perryman has been preparing this analysis for us really about every other year since 2007. So the latest was last year, 2014. And so my organization in combination with the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce has been doing that, and that was September of 2014. Some highlights of the study is some very large numbers, and that is that the Barnett Shale continues to contribute almost $12 billion a year to the economy in North Texas. That's a big number. And in addition to that, over 107,000 permanent jobs. And it's very important when you think about, we talk about the importance of natural gas, and of course it obviously is very important, or else it wouldn't be providing this economic impact. But it has continued. And as I said earlier, I think there was, we didn't know early on, would the Barnett Shale, be a flurry of activity and then just play out, or would it continue? And it's continued. The drilling activity, as I'll show you a little later, has declined, but yet the economic impact on the region has not declined. Something else that's very important is that the economic activity not only creates a lot of income for people and businesses in the area, creates a lot of tax revenue. And the taxing entities, the cities, counties, and school districts have benefited tremendously from this activity. Some of the school districts in the Barnett Shale have the highest per student expenditures in the United States because they have a lot of money. And We've driven, you'll drive some country roads, and all of a sudden you come across what looks like a college campus, and it's a high school. And it's because they have a lot of tax money that's come in, and they're using that to in their education programs. By the way, it's just, there are 4 counties. If you're not from Texas, this doesn't matter much to you, but Tarrant County is where Fort Worth is located, and there are a few other counties that most of this activity is focused in, but it is in 4 counties. I want to stop here and talk one thing about the one reason why this economic impact has been as important as it has, and it's because of the regulatory environment in Texas. I think if the shale had been developed or tried to develop in some other areas, it might not have developed as quickly and as well. In Texas, the oil and gas activity is regulated by a state entity called the Railroad Commission. Now, they don't regulate railroads, but they regulate oil and gas activity. So that's confusing to everybody, including most Texans. They keep trying to change the name, and it just, and politics are being what they are, it just never gets changed. And but the Railroad Commission regulates everything that goes on below the surface. And but the Railroad Commission has the authority to regulate for the purpose of developing oil and gas reserves, developing oil and gas. And that, I think, is a notion that sometimes sounds a little foreign. In other words, they're not regulating for the purpose of trying to stop it or even slow it down. They're regulating for the purpose of encouraging the development of oil and gas reserves while protecting the public. So they've got at least a dual role there of, we need to regulate, we need to be sure it's done in a safe manner, an environmentally friendly manner, but we don't want to discourage it. We don't want to stop it. And so that's the regulatory environment, unlike, or that could be in contrast to some other states, New York, which bans hydraulic fracturing. Now, so there's a completely different approach to regulation. You have a state that says, we're not going to allow it. And in Texas, it's completely the opposite. They say, not only do we want to allow it, we want to encourage it. We just want to be sure it's done in a safe manner and an environmentally friendly manner. And which kind of gets me around, and this is a little out of sequence, but I have to. You may have read about this, but one of those counties right there, Denton County, which is one of the counties that has the largest economic benefits of the Barnett Shale. It's just north of Fort Worth. University there is University of North Texas. It's a kind of a small college town, but has a lot of oil and gas activity. Denton, last year, not too many months ago, became the first city in Texas to ban hydraulic fracturing. Now, you might say, how un-Texan can you get? And a lot of Texans have said that. That's not right. And there's a long story, I guess, of how that came to be. And the short story, I'll just summarize, is that there were some people in Denton that just didn't like it. They didn't like the drilling rig down the street. They didn't want to see it. And some of the university people played a large role in that. But they developed a movement with a petition to ban hydraulic fracturing within the city limits of Denton. And it was a tremendous campaign on both sides, as you might imagine, but it came down to a vote, and the majority of the residents of Denton voted to ban hydraulic fracturing. Now, banning hydraulic fracturing because we're talking about the Barnett Shale, means banning drilling. No one would drill a well if they couldn't use hydraulic fracturing, because, as I said earlier, when you drill into the Barnett Shale, nothing comes out until you come in and do the process, the completion process, as we call it, of hydraulic fracturing. So here you have this town in Denton, Texas, that says we're banning hydraulic fracturing. Well, the next day, there were 2 lawsuits filed against the city of Denton, one by the Texas Oil and Gas Association, but one by the state of Texas. The General Land Office, which is the Texas agency that manages state-owned lands. And they manage those state-owned lands, which a lot of that means managing the oil and gas revenues. And those oil and gas revenues go into the permanent school fund. So the fact that Denton is banned hydraulic fracturing says they're banning drilling and therefore banning royalty income from going into the permanent school fund. The state of Texas says you can't do that. The General Land Office did, and they filed a lawsuit. And so that whole thing has become so controversial that the state of Texas legislature just is today, right now, I think as we speak, they are debating a bill, HB 40, that bans bans. Basically says you can't ban drilling in Texas. You cannot ban hydraulic fracturing. And it's very controversial because the cities in Texas and other states I know, but in Texas, home rule, as they call it, is a very important local control, if you will, a very important notion. And so in this case, you have the state of Texas saying, we're not going to allow you, the city, to make decisions about oil and gas activity. And you can't ban it. That the Railroad Commission has the authority to do that. And cities have always been able to, and will still, under these bills, be able to regulate what we call the setback distance, the distance from a well to a home. In Fort Worth, for example, that's 600 feet. And in some cities, it's a little less, and in some cities, it's a little more. But cities regulate that. They can regulate truck traffic or where trucks go. They can regulate lighting. They can regulate noise. But what they can't regulate is anything that goes on below the surface. And these bills that are in the House and the Senate in Texas right now are affirming that, saying the Railroad Commission has that authority and you, the cities, cannot do that. But I just wanted to bring that up because, first of all, it's something, if you start reading a lot about hydraulic fracturing, fracking, and drilling in the United States, you'll start to run into the controversial aspects of it. And so I'm making a presentation here about the benefits and the economic benefits and the tremendous economic benefits. But it is controversial in a lot of areas, and here it is even in the state of Texas. And so, of course, from an energy educator standpoint, my position is people would have a negative impression of hydraulic fracturing because they just don't understand it. So as an educator, I need to try to help them understand it. Of course, emotions run deep, so it's not always easy to make those communications. But I wanted you to be aware of that because, as I said, the regulatory environment in Texas is such that up until Denton, it was encouraging the development, and that's of oil and gas, and that's why I think the Barnett Shale developed as quickly as it did, and then all the other shales in the state. So I want to skip over, I don't want to read a bunch of numbers to you. I want to skip through this really quick and get to, I'm sorry. Here it is. The Barnett Shale wells and shale oil and gas wells in general have an interesting characteristic, and that is when they come on, the production level is very high, and then they tend to fall off really quickly in the first couple of years, and then they level out as far as production. I mean, they decline over time, but they decline very slowly after the first couple of years. And in the case of the Barnett Shale, turns out these wells have declined quite slowly overall. And so there's been a tremendous economic impact in the first 10 or 15 years, but that's expected to continue because these wells will produce 30, 40, 50 years. These are very long-lived wells. And so over the next 10 years, the economic impact is projected to be almost $155 billion. It's been 15 years, and for the next 10 years. So it's going to last a long time. 1,354,720 person years of employment. That's how Dr. Perryman termed that. And you can see $6 billion in tax receipts to the local governments and $8 billion in tax receipts to the state of Texas. So it's a significant economic engine in the state. And here's what this is a graphic showing what I just said. This top line here, well, the bottom line, the red one, is the drilling activity. And you can see that it peaked here in 2008, and it has dropped off tremendously. How many wells are being drilled in the Barnett Shale? But if you notice the production level at the top here, it's declined some, but not very much. It's remained amazingly flat. So even though few wells are being drilled, the production continues at a very high level, and that's actually amazed, I think, a lot of the engineers and geologists that this has actually happened as it has. And one reason the economic impact is so tremendous is their economists call the multiplier effect. When this money comes into a region, let's say a worker gets paid for working on a drilling rig, buys a house, buys a new car, stays in a hotel, eats at a restaurant, and that money gets spent over and over and over. And the Perryman Group estimated that economic multiplier is over 6 in the Barnett Shale area, and that's because so many of the businesses that are associated with drilling and hydraulic fracturing are located there. So the money just gets spent over and over, and that really does make that economic impact very important. So, as I say here, thanks to hydraulic fracturing, the economic benefits are being enjoyed not only in the Barnett Shale in the state of Texas, but all over the United States. And the Perryman Group, in fact, estimated that the economic benefits of oil and gas activities in the U.S., including the multiplier effects, are currently now over $1 trillion in gross product, creating more than 9.3 million permanent jobs. So oil and gas activity is an extremely important economic engine in the U.S. and supports 7% of the U.S. economy when you add it all up. So thank you very much, and I'll be glad to answer any questions if we have time. Well, actually, the last slide was all oil and gas activity, right, including offshore in the United States, right? I can't off the top of my head, but I'll be glad to do it for you after. Well, yeah, there's. I can tell you this: oil and gas from shales in the United States is now about half. So between offshore and onshore, I don't have that off the top of my head, but shale energy now accounts for about half of all the energy, oil and gas energy that's produced in the United States. So, and that's happened really just in the last few years. Yep, that's a great question. The question was, when you have a lot of drilling in urban areas, which is what we're talking about here in North Texas, do you have evidence that you have air pollution or water contamination as a result? And that's a great question, because those questions or allegations or concerns come up a lot. And so I'll just take them one at a time. As far as air, that's been a big question in North Texas. Dallas-Fort Worth area is a huge metropolitan area. It's always had an air pollution problem and continues to. But because of all the oil and gas activity, the Environmental Commission in Texas, that's called the TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, that's the state agency. They have placed, over the last few years, 15 permanent air monitors in the Barnett Shale area to address exactly that question. Are these wells contributing to the air pollution in the area? And the answer has been a resounding no, it's not. With these 15 air monitors, they have collected millions and millions of air tests over the last 10 years. And TCEQ says that not a single one of those air tests has ever registered a health concern, anything near a health concern. So the problem with the air in the Dallas-Fort Worth area is, too many people live there and drive cars. I mean, that really is the bottom line. And that if you look at oil and gas activity, the TCEQ says that is not being impacted negatively by oil and gas activity. As far as water, all of those 20,000 wells that I mentioned pass through major freshwater aquifers. So the potential for some kind of contamination is there. But the Railroad Commission, if you go to the Texas Railroad Commission website, it will tell you, if you look up air water contamination, it will tell you on their website that there has never been a single instance, a single case in the state of Texas that hydraulic fracturing has been associated with water contamination. And that's because of the way these wells are constructed. These are not just open holes in the ground. When they drill that well, the first thing they do is run casing, which is steel pipe, down that well and cement it into place. And then they do that multiple times. So in fact, there are layers and layers of steel casing and cement that prevent anything that's going down that hole or coming back up from getting into the freshwater aquifers. So it's been a great place, I think, to generate the information that answers those questions, saying that oil and gas activity is not contaminating the water and it's not contributing to air pollution. Yes, and that's another good question about property values, because that would come up. People say, well, if there's drilling a well or there's a producing well down the street from me, what impact does that have? And so that's been studied quite a bit too. And the answers have come back that in some cases, while the well is being drilled, a home may stay on the market longer, or the property value may decline, but it's only a very brief period. And that once the drilling rig is gone, which it's only there a few weeks, I mean, we're talking a short period of time, that real estate values have not been impacted. And if you look at the whole area, the real estate values have skyrocketed. So, and even in Denton, where they're banning it, you can go to Zillow and put in Denton, Texas, and look it up. The housing values there have skyrocketed. So any impacts of drilling certainly are not there. How do oil and gas prices affect? Oh, I'm sorry, low oil and gas prices. It certainly is having an impact, no question about it. Oil prices have come down by half, really, in just the last few months. So that has had a tremendous impact. Companies, oil and gas companies, are in the business of drilling new wells, but when the price declines, drilling activity declines. And what companies start doing is they start focusing on their most productive areas and just reducing their drilling activity in general, until the prices recover. So there has been some layoffs, and there has been a reduction in overall activity. As far as the state of Texas is concerned, there is some reduction in the overall employment level, but at least as yet, it hasn't been a tremendous negative. But the longer it goes on, of course, the bigger that impact will be. But that's one thing about the oil and gas industry. It's always been a cyclical industry, and it still is. So that it goes through cycles, and this is one of those cycles. So there is an impact for sure. But if the price will stabilize where it is now and not continue to go down, then that situation won't last long. Yes, there is some storage of natural gas. They actually store natural gas in salt caverns and naturally occurring, in the ground. Otherwise, there's not storage of natural gas in tanks is not something that's very significant. So there is some of these salt cavern storages. But those are kind of geographically limited. A lot of those are in South Texas, South Louisiana. And so there's been some increase in that, but not a lot. For the most part, natural gas is produced, put into pipelines, and consumed. There's some storage, but it's fairly minor. One thing that, in fact, Hopper mentioned is that because there is such a large potential for producing more natural gas than we're producing and consuming in the United States, we really need to be exporting it. And there are legal restrictions in the United States, unfortunately, on exporting natural gas in the form of LNG, and those are being slowly removed, but the quicker the better, because we have a lot of natural gas that we could be producing and exporting that we're not. So that would also have a positive impact on the employment side if we could start exporting more.
Great, thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks.